in Mago Reddit. Today's story is
My wife, who was pregnant with twins, kept a terrible secret for a whole month, and what she revealed changed our family forever. I have always had a moderately close relationship with my parents, and until a few months ago we got on quite well. We stopped communicating after a particular incident where they treated my wife in a very disrespectful and insensitive way. My wife was approximately 5 months pregnant at the time and was not having an easy pregnancy. We discovered that she was expecting twins during the second trimester. She suffered from extreme morning sickness to the point that it was difficult for her to stand up after being sick. She also had varicose veins. She constantly felt exhausted and worn out, and it was a really difficult period for her. During that time, I was offered a temporary position as a project manager, a great opportunity because they were offering me excellent compensation for just 1 month's work. My wife, knowing how important it was to me, encouraged me to accept it, although I had my doubts about leaving her alone at home. I asked her parents to come and stay with her for a few days while I was away, just to make sure she was looked after, but unfortunately that didn't work out because they had their own business and couldn't find anyone to cover for them. Finally, I decided to ask my own parents to move into our house for just a month to look after my wife, because I simply didn't want her to be alone, for my peace of mind. They accepted quite happily, and they had always maintained a good relationship with her, so I didn't think anything could go wrong, but it did. For the first 2 weeks while I was away, my wife sounded quite normal when we spoke, but then I started to notice that she always seemed extremely tired, and she was also quite irritable with me. I didn't understand what was happening. I even asked her if she wanted me to come back earlier after 2 weeks, but she insisted that I stay because this was important for my career. I put the change in her behavior down to pregnancy hormones and tried not to worry too much. And then, after a month, I finally returned home, and a couple of days later my parents left. During that time, I could sense that things hadn't gone well between my wife and my parents because the energy was very strange and the atmosphere quite tense. Finally, after they left, my wife and I had a conversation about what had happened. She explained that she didn't want me to worry while I was away working and wanted me to be able to concentrate on my work, so she hadn't told me anything about what was going on with her in my absence. But now that I was back, she wanted me to know that my parents had been absolutely terrible to her. Apparently, even though she had constantly said that she couldn't be active all the time, they didn't seem to care and made her work like a domestic servant. Instead of helping her, which was precisely why she had asked them to stay with her, they forced her to work twice as much as she would have had to if she had been on her own. She ended up doing all the chores because my parents complained that they were too old to be doing all that, which really wasn't true. They do all their housework themselves at home because they don't like to spend money on help. So it's not like they weren't used to it, and they knew full well that my wife was having a difficult pregnancy, so the least they could have done was to help her instead of making her work even harder. And as if that wasn't bad enough, they insisted on creating additional tasks for her and told her that staying active was the only way to have a healthy pregnancy and delivery, because otherwise, if she started to get lazy, things would get even worse for her. She didn't want to waste her time and energy arguing with them, so she eventually ended up doing everything they asked of her. Every day she would end up exhausted and just wanted them to leave, but she didn't want to be rude, so she put up with them until I returned. But now she needed some space away from them. Obviously, I was very upset when I heard all this, and I immediately confronted my parents about it, and they didn't deny it. They said that my wife was just being paranoid and hysterical, and that there was nothing wrong with her, even though the doctors had explicitly stated that she should not overexert herself. I wanted them to take my word for it, but they insisted that they had also seen many pregnancies in their time and that they did not believe any of this modern nonsense. They told me we were being too soft, and instead of trying to understand my point of view, they told me I should be grateful to them for doing me and my wife the favor of not letting her rest all day. That was too much for me, so we had a pretty intense argument, and after that we cut off all communication. They weren't even present at the birth of my twins, and frankly I didn't care at all because the way they had treated my wife was not acceptable to me, and unless they apologized to both of us, I didn't want to have any kind of relationship with them. With that in mind, recently, when they turned up at my house to try and see the children, I told them they were not welcome until they apologized to us. Even then they made a fuss in front of my house saying that we couldn't treat them like that, and that as grandparents, they had every right to see their grandchildren. But even then I stuck to my guns and wouldn't let them in. Eventually, my father told me that this was a big exaggeration and that I was being disrespectful. He mentioned that I would regret this in the future, and I don't know, feeling a little guilty about it right now. Do you think I overreacted? Am I the bad guy for refusing to let my parents see my babies because of how they treated my wife during her pregnancy? Update 1. Hi everyone, thank you so much for all the comments we have received. It really means a lot to us. I talked to my wife about how I felt and told her that I felt a little strange and guilty. She replied that if I really wanted to, I could definitely invite my parents over and try to patch things up with them, but she would prefer to stay out of it for now because she doesn't feel ready to talk to them at the moment, especially considering that even after confronting them, they never bothered to get in touch and offer an apology. I told her that if she wasn't ready, I wouldn't contact them either because right now no one else is my priority besides her and the babies. And if my parents feel hurt now, they can work that out for themselves. There's really nothing I can do about it. It's true what she mentioned, they had plenty of time to reach out and apologize to both of us, but they chose not to. So now they can't be so smug and pretend we're the bad guys just because we don't want to let them back into our lives when they don't even regret their behavior. And most importantly, this is my life, my family, and I choose who can be a part of it. I'm not going to let their attempt to make me feel guilty convince me to let them back into our lives, especially when they disappointed me so much last time. Anyway, now that that's cleared up, there are a few things I wanted to address about the comments people have been making. Some people considered it quite presumptuous of me to have asked my parents to stay with my wife for a month and look after her while she was pregnant, without offering anything in return, and they certainly didn't hold back in expressing their opinions about it. So let me clarify that, first of all, it wasn't an obligation. They definitely could have said no. I just asked them very casually if they would like to do that for me as a favor, and I made it very clear that it would be a favor for me. I couldn't offer them compensation because we've been saving money for the babies over the last few months and they're my parents, so I didn't think I'd need to pay them, but even if they'd asked, I don't think I would have refused. In fact, even if they'd turned down the offer, I wouldn't have left my wife alone at home while she was pregnant and struggling to do things for herself. And just to clarify, I know that a lot of people said that my wife was overreacting and that my parents were right, and that I should have been grateful to them, but I think that the doctors, my wife and I know what we are doing. She had been medically advised not to overexert herself, and that is what we were trying to ensure. So even if my parents had refused to stay with her, I would have spent some money and we would have sorted it out. We would have just hired someone like a housekeeper, an assistant or a nurse to be with her and help her with all the housework and so on. But I decided to rely on my parents because they agreed and I knew that they got on well with my wife, so I didn't anticipate any of this. They were fully informed about her difficulties, the advice her doctor had given her, and I had even explained to them personally how I wanted them to help her, but they ignored all that and chose to do as they pleased. It's very disrespectful and was totally unnecessary. If they planned to do that from the beginning, they should have rejected the proposal instead of putting my wife through all that suffering. Just because my wife's situation was different from the limited knowledge they had about pregnant women, they decided they knew better and overruled everything I had told them and ignored all my wife's complaints. She was in a pretty bad state during that month and even for a couple of weeks afterwards. She was so exhausted she could hardly do anything. So it's not like we didn't face the consequences of what they put her through, and they never apologized for it, not once. So if anyone still thinks I'm being presumptuous just because I asked them to help me, I have nothing more to say because I know for a fact that even if they had turned down the proposal, it wouldn't have bothered me. But their decision to ignore everything we had said and do things their way, no matter how inconvenient and problematic it was for everyone else, and never apologize and pretend they had been right all along, I think that is true presumption, but whatever, it doesn't matter anymore. I've made my decision and I'm not going to communicate with them again to repair our relationship, at least for now. I'm busy with my wife and babies, with my family, and for now everything else can wait. Update 2. Hi all, it's been 2 months since the babies were born and about a month since I last spoke to my parents, after I told them I didn't want to talk to them at the door and asked them to leave. They didn't try to contact me again until yesterday. At first I felt a little strange about it, but honestly I didn't have much time to worry about them. I was swamped with work, housework, looking after the babies and everything else, so I really had a lot on my plate and had completely forgotten about the whole situation with my parents. We were fine for a while, but yesterday they called me again and when I didn't answer the first few times because I was napping, they decided to tell me that they had something important to discuss with me and that I needed to call them back as soon as possible. As soon as I woke up, I checked my phone and then I called them back after thinking about it for a while, because I thought maybe they were sick or something, and I didn't want to take any chances. I'm not on good terms with them at the moment, but they're still my parents and I'm their only child, so that's why I decided to call them. And as soon as they answered, they started telling me that a month had passed since they last tried to get in touch with me, but that since then I hadn't even bothered to try to contact them once. They told me it was very disappointing that I was treating them like that, even though they hadn't even done anything that bad. My mother told me that I was being very selfish and that she didn't expect this kind of behavior from me, and she commented that my father had been very upset over the last few weeks. They kept waiting for me to call, but I never did, and suddenly he started blaming my wife for it. She told me that she was pretty sure that it was my wife who was trying to push them away because even while they were staying with her and trying to do their best for her, they still had the feeling that she didn't appreciate their presence. She said that they resented the way we were treating them now and that we needed to be more respectful of them, and that even now it's not too late and we can fix things by arranging a meeting to talk. And the amazing thing is that I really could have agreed to make things right with them if they had taken a different approach to the situation. But once again, they tried to present themselves as the victims when clearly that wasn't the case. Even now they were insisting that we should have reached out to them and apologized, and that's what really annoyed me. I couldn't believe they were still harping on about it, so during the call I told them that I had no intention of making things up to them because they were clearly living in a fantasy even now. I told them that the way they had treated my wife while she was pregnant was very disrespectful, and if they couldn't apologize for that, I'm afraid nothing can be done about the situation we find ourselves in now. I asked them if they would be willing to apologize to my wife, and they very brazenly said no. They were about to explain themselves too, but I told them that since they had said no, just as I expected, everything was resolved and I didn't need to hear anything else. As they were trying to speak, I cut them off and hung up. Then I told my wife about the strange call. She seemed a little sad and said it was very annoying that even now they were acting as if what they had done was somehow justified. She said what really saddened her was that she got on well with them before all this happened, so it's not as if she wasn't open to reconciling with them, and I was right. If they had just said they were sorry, we would have made an effort to repair our relationship. But the way they were being stubborn to avoid the consequences of their own actions, that was what was really bothering us. We decided that unless they apologize, we are not even going to interact with them. No phone calls, no messages, nothing at all. I think that is the best way to handle the situation at the moment, because otherwise they just won't get it. I don't think they understand even now the seriousness of what happened. If they want to have a relationship with us and the babies, they are going to have to apologize. There is no other way. Update 3. Hi all, it's been 2 weeks since my last update, and after that phone call, my parents tried to contact me via text message and email several times, but I simply silenced them. If it wasn't an apology they were offering, I wasn't interested. I read their texts and emails occasionally every couple of days for the first week, but when I realized that they were just trying to justify and defend their actions, I stopped checking their messages altogether because it was very disappointing to see this kind of behavior coming from my parents, especially when we had had a normal relationship for so long. Up until now they had always only sent messages to me, but they had avoided interacting with my wife. In a way it was good because I didn't want them to talk to her, especially as I knew how they felt about her at the moment. So I thought it would be better if they didn't interact with her at all. But a couple of days ago they decided to communicate with her with a really offensive message. They sent her a text message a couple of days ago around 9 in the morning, which is an inappropriate time to send disrespectful messages like the one they sent her. Basically, they told her the same thing they had told me in the phone call, that they blamed her for the way I was behaving now, as if I were a child with no will of my own. They said it was very unpleasant of her to be manipulating me into believing that they had been horrible to her when, according to them, they had been trying to help her. In the end, they said they wanted her to apologize and they wanted her to tell me the truth, that they had actually been trying to help her and that she, being lazy, didn't appreciate it and didn't even try to understand that they were being helpful. So she supposedly deliberately misinterpreted their actions and painted them as the villains, and now she continues to manipulate me and take me away from them. It was very offensive because it insinuated that she found it difficult to do things around the house because she was lazy, and that was not true at all. I think I have mentioned it many times now, the doctors had literally told her not to push herself too hard or it could lead to even greater exhaustion and fatigue. That is literally the only reason she had asked them to stay with her. I can't believe they're still trying to defend themselves and have even gone so far as to involve her and make her look like the manipulator. I also don't really understand why they keep acting like I have no say in this. I'm not a child. I can make my own decisions. It's not like my wife controls me. We're both adults. We respect each other's opinions. That's how things work between normal people. So I don't know why they are blaming her for my actions now, because ultimately these are my choices, as I have decided that I don't want to talk to them at the moment. She had told me from the beginning that I was free to talk to my parents and she was even willing to let the children interact with them. She just said she didn't want to talk to them. It was me who chose to present United Front because if my wife wasn't talking to my parents, I didn't want to get involved in that either. So they couldn't be more wrong when they accuse her of trying to manipulate me and keep me away from them, or whatever it is they're accusing her of. They have no idea what's going on, and it's really despicable that they're trying to blame everything on my wife. She was quite upset by their message in the morning, and after talking to her, I decided to call my parents and confront them about it. I wasn't expecting any kind of apology from them. I'd stopped expecting a long time ago. Surprisingly, this time it was they who were trying to ignore me, probably because they had realized that I was not going to be happy with this and it was going to make the situation even worse for them. But I didn't give up. I wanted them to acknowledge what they had done, so I called them several times and finally, after almost 10 minutes, they answered the call. My father answered and immediately told me that if I was calling to talk about the message they had sent to my wife, then it was pointless because they were not willing to discuss it. At the end of the day, they knew that what they had said was right, and if I was going to get defensive about it, it was only going to prove to them that she was really manipulating me and trying to turn me against them. I knew they thought they had me cornered at that point, but honestly, I didn't really care about their opinions. I just told them that they couldn't be further from the truth and explained the situation to them about how she had been fine with me interacting with them, but it had been my choice not to. So the fact that they were trying to blame her was not only unfair, but also really absurd on their part because now they appear to be completely wrong. And given how disrespectful they had been to her, they dug the deepest hole for themselves, as now I am going to eliminate them from my life completely. Before this, we had been willing to accept their apology and try to repair our relationship if they had tried to communicate with us and apologize. But now that is not going to happen at all. Once again, on the phone they tried to argue with me, but I hung up before that. This happened a couple of days ago and after that, until today, we didn't speak at all. They couldn't because I blocked them afterwards, and my wife did too, and we were calm. But then this morning my parents showed up at our door and once again they chose around 8 a.m. to show up. Now this is the time I leave for work, and although my wife is working from home at the moment, it's not like she's sitting at home doing nothing. We're both busy for the rest of the day, so we like to make the most of this period of time before work and we really don't like interruptions during this time. So when they showed up, we were determined not to go to the door at all and just pretend that we were no longer at home. We thought that eventually they would get tired and leave, but the more we ignored them, the louder they became, and after a while the babies started to get restless, to get upset and to cry. So then I finally decided to go to the door, open it and talk to them, and I was already very irritated at that point. So when I opened the door, I told them straight away that I didn't want to talk to them and that if they behaved like that, they were only going to ruin their own chances of reconciling with us. But to my surprise, they told me that they weren't even here to reconcile. They were only here to inform me that they too had decided to cut ties with us. My mother told me that they had discussed it and decided that the way I was behaving was not acceptable. So until I decided to change my mind, they had decided to leave everything to my cousins. They said they were very unfortunate because they had never had any other children. They had always thought that as long as they had me, they wouldn't have to worry about things like this, but now that I had started to obey my wife more, it was clear that they were not a priority for me. I was quite irritated, so I told them they were right about that. They were not a priority for me at the moment. It was my family, my wife and my children who were the top priority for me at the moment. And if they couldn't respect and understand that, maybe it was best if we parted ways. They were enraged at that statement and told me that they had already spoken to a lawyer and had started the procedure to change their will, and that they were only there to tell me that. I just shrugged and said nothing because I don't even know what exactly they expected me to say. When they realized that they weren't going to get a reaction out of me, which was what they had come all this way for, they stormed off muttering under their breaths, and I knew that they were cursing me and my wife, but I didn't care. I was just glad they left without causing any more trouble, and then I went back to my wife and children. It wasn't very nice and I've already decided that the next time they show up like that and bother us, I'm just going to call the police because I don't have to deal with this. Things are getting out of hand and I guess they just can't accept the fact that I'm not going to apologize for something as basic as standing up for my wife. If they expect that, they're going to be disappointed. And I really don't care about their money. They can give it to whoever they want. The only reason I work hard is so I don't have to depend on anyone else. So I don't understand why they think this is going to affect me, but whatever. I really just hope they take the hint and stay away from us now. Update 4. Hi, it's been 3 months since my last update and so far my parents haven't contacted me. Today, coincidentally, we were at the local grocery store at the same time and bumped into each other, and it was quite awkward. We were fine, we were just ignoring them and walking past, but they made a big show of turning their faces away, refusing to even look at us and pretending as if we were contaminated in some way. I knew the desired effect was to unsettle us, but we just thought it was very funny. It's sad that they're being so immature about the whole thing because, ultimately, they're missing out on time with their grandchildren and their only child, but that's their choice and I can't help it. So I'm not going to worry about it either. They've made their decision. Now they can live with it.